Verse 2 says, "Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves." Well, that's pretty obvious that if we buck against the authority of our government, that we are going to bring judgment from that government on ourselves. And so the Bible tells us that we are to live peaceably in the land that we are in. If you're under Saddam Hussein and he says no Christianity, then of course that's violating God's higher law, and you're to disobey that law. Likewise, if the American government was to come out and to say abortions are now mandatory for anybody that has more than one child, then we are to disobey that law, because they are imposing a standard which is anti-biblical on the people. However, if they say abortion in itself is legal but not mandatory, then we have to accept that. That is not contrary to God's law for a government to pass a legal abortion law. Now, we can work within the framework of the government to get that overturned, but we can't fight against the government over something that they have legally and providentially, I should even add, allowed. But mandatory abortions would be something that we would fight against. If God's law is higher than man's law, so if something is contrary to God's law, then we are to fight against it. But if it is within the framework of God's law, which is very general for the establishment of governments, etc., then we are to live within that framework. Anyway, verse 3 says, "For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil." Now that's a pretty general statement, because some rulers are a terror to their people. But normally, if you obey the rulers of the land, then you will have no problem with them. As I said, Christianity is becoming more and more persecuted, but as it stands right now, we are to obey the laws of the land, to work within the framework of the government. If they ever said preaching the gospel is against the law, then I would come and preach the gospel just simply to break the law, because this is my duty as a Christian. But anyway, it's a general statement. Rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. Well, obviously, if you do what's good in a land and it's legal and it's the right thing to do, then you'll have praise. And if not, then you'll go to jail or get executed or whatever they decide. So this is common sense here, but people don't seem to understand it. You get these guys that go and blow up abortion clinics. Well, they're not following God's law. They're not doing that at all. It is legal in the country to have an abortion. It doesn't affect the Christians personally. We can work against it because we think it's morally unjust, but we are not to go blowing up abortion clinics because it's a legal thing that does not personally affect us. As I said, if it personally affects us and they say these are mandatory after the first child, then we're to fight against that ruling authority. But until that point, we are to obey the government and the laws of the land. Verse 4 says, "For he," meaning the ruler, "is God's minister to you for good." Once again, he repeats that it is God's minister. He is a person that has been divinely selected by God to rule over a nation or a people, and that was God's choice. And so for whatever reason, good ruler or bad, we are to obey what that ruler says. Where am I? "But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain, for he is God's minister and avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil." Now this is coming from Paul, who was living under Nero at the time. And Nero, if you know your history, was a tyrant. He was a terrible, terrible person, and the government that he ruled over was scared. It was intimidating of its people, and he was writing these words under the worst possible circumstances. So understand that just because we're not happy with the way things are doesn't mean that it is not the way that God has ordained for our lives. So we are to be submissive to our rulers, we're to be submissive to those appointed over us, and we're to obey the laws of the land until they are contrary to God's higher law. "Therefore you must be subject, not only because of wrath, but also because of conscience sake." Okay, I'm a Christian and I'm not doing what the law says. What does that say about me? Everybody else is going to say, see, those Christians, they're all hypocritical, they're, blah, blah, blah. Now, if they understand I'm doing something because it is contrary, the law over me is contrary to God's law, then they should be complimentary of that. Man, this guy really has morals and values about what he is doing, and whether we agree with him or not, he is holding to the higher standard. It's not always the case, but in the meantime, for conscience sake, we are to do what is right and to follow the laws of the land in which we are in. It's pretty clear we are not to be bucking against the system. So, speed limit is set at 60, do 60 or get a ticket. And you should have a conscience that says, I'm going over 60 miles an hour. Now, Charlie Garrett has been, and I'll admit it freely, I have been a little negligent in my speed limit following during this trip, because I'm in the middle of the desert, there's nobody around, and the speed limit is 55 on a highway. I'm like, you know, it's going to take me 6 months to get where I'm going, so yeah, maybe I've exceeded the speed limit more than I should have. But normally I try always to follow the speed limit, because it's set for a reason. Sometimes we have to question why, but we're supposed to follow the laws of the land, so I'm kind of admitting my own guilt there. But just wanted to let you know that a conscience tells us that we should be doing these things, and the ticket proves that the law was right. You know, it doesn't matter whether we agree with it or not. When we get a ticket, that means that we were violating the law. Anyway, verse 6 says, "For because of this you also pay taxes. For they," meaning the leaders, "are God's ministers, attending continually to this very thing." We pay taxes because the Bible tells us to pay taxes. We do not cheat on our taxes. We do not violate the law of the land in this respect. Even if they're, the taxes they're passing right now are not only bizarre, but they're destructive to the society. But we are to pay them. These people were voted into office. They are our leaders. They pass these goofy laws. We're going to have to live with them. At some point, we can vote them out. We can get a new tax system, a fairer tax system, one that does right by our standards. Okay, that's great. But until then, we are to pay the taxes that are levied upon us. Now, it says the reason why we pay taxes here is because they're God's ministers, attending continually to this very thing. So it's saying we're paying taxes to support our leaders. Well, you know, in America, we're paying taxes to support everything except our leaders, and including our leaders. I mean, we support Egypt, and we support, countries that hate us through our taxes, and our taxes are taken from us and given to illegal immigrants, and on and on and on it goes. But, you know, technically, it's what Paul is saying is that it's to support our leaders, but, you know, our leaders are making the decisions about all these other bad choices, and we just have to live with them. So let me tell my dog to shut up, and I'll be right back. Hey, you be quiet, you. Verse 7 says, "Render therefore to all their due, taxes to whom taxes are due, custom to whom customs, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor." So we're to render our due to these people. If we owe them taxes, we render our taxes, as I just said, and I gave you a reason why. But in addition to this, we're to customs to who customs are due. I mean, they set up customs in a nation or in a land for their purposes, and we're to pay those customs. And then likewise, fear to whom fear. You know, if we are to fear our leaders and show respect in that way to them, then that's what we're to do. And if we're to honor our leaders, if there's a protocol in a court that says that we're to stand up when the judge walks in, then we're to do that. We're to give honor where honor is due. And, you know, a real on a side issue, talking about honor, suppose in America, it's honorable to call somebody that's older than you sir. Isn't that something we should be doing? I mean, we've lost way too much of this in our society in the past 15 or 20 years. Children calling people by their first names and neglecting respect for elders. You know, in Leviticus 19, I think it's the 20th verse, but let me pull it out while I'm talking to you. It says to stand in the presence of the gray-haired. And, that's something that we just don't do anymore. We don't stand in the presence of these older people. Here it is, verse 32, 1932. It says, "You shall rise before the gray-headed and honor the presence of an old man, and fear your God. I am the Lord." We don't even bother saying hello to them anymore, much less standing up when they walk into a room. And we should be showing proper respect to people, our leaders as well as people around us. But anyway, that's kind of a side issue from what he's talking about. Verse 8 says, "Owe no one anything except to love one another." Man, I wish our government would read that and listen to it. Owe no one anything. Our founding fathers established this nation saying we should never get into debt. And here we are in debt up to our eyeballs and even more. And so, unfortunately, our leaders think that this applies to people, but not to the government or to themselves.